At a high-stakes celebration in an ultra-modern glass pavilion overlooking Boston Harbor, I stepped toward my husband Tyler, leaning in for a simple kiss on the dance floor. He violently jerked backward, his face contorting with disgust. "I would rather kiss my dog than look at you," he sneered. The elite crowd of venture capitalists roared with laughter. Soaking up their validation, Tyler barked, "You do not even meet my standards. Stay away from me." I stood entirely frozen under the oppressive chandeliers, my identity publicly stripped away. Have you ever felt like you were treating someone as a priority while they were treating you like an embarrassing accessory? Let me know your story down in the comments. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I stared at my reflection in the cold glass of the pavilion, realizing I had been the silent investor in his version of reality for far too long. Tyler seamlessly pivoted back to his colleagues, discussing quarterly growth with Marcus and Jessica, the founding partners of his venture capital firm. He casually adjusted the lapel of his flawless, expensive suit. It was a suit I had paid for outright. I watched him perform for the crowd, realizing exactly how deeply my entire life had been scripted. Before every high-stakes gathering, Tyler would rehearse me like an underperforming employee facing a performance review. He would adjust my dress fittings, critique my posture, and strictly dictate my conversational boundaries. His absolute strictest mandate was always about my career. If asked by anyone in his status-conscious circle, I was instructed to tell them that I simply worked at Mass General. I was strictly forbidden from mentioning that I was the lead pediatric neurosurgeon or that I ran the entire neuro-oncology unit. I was never to mention that my surgical research had brought in millions in institutional funding. 5 years ago, when we first met, he had used my medical pedigree as an elite currency to elevate his own social capital. He loved telling his lower-level peers he was marrying a brilliant surgeon. But as his firm grew and he climbed the corporate ladder, my real-world value structurally threatened his fragile performance-based identity. He could not rise to my intellectual or financial level, so he treated my towering professional status like an embarrassing radioactive secret that had to be aggressively contained. He needed me to be a decorative accessory, a manageable, quiet prop in his curated ecosystem. Standing in that stifling luxury pavilion, the air thick with expensive cologne and absolute indifference, I felt the jarring, painful contrast between this room and my true domain. In my operating theater, the environment is sterile, brilliant, and life-giving. Every single movement has a profound, measurable purpose. Here, beneath the crystal chandeliers, everything was an exhausting illusion. I had intentionally dimmed my own light for years just to keep his ego off life support. I had performed emotional CPR on a rotting marriage, minimizing my own brilliance just to maintain the peace. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon a shred of regret. But there was only absolute cognitive clarity. The dance floor humiliation was not a tragedy. It was a balance sheet finally being reconciled. The economic reality of our marriage had always been a deeply skewed ledger. I stood by the edge of the room and thought about the staggering financial sacrifices he had extracted from me over the years. Just last month, Tyler had unilaterally allocated $1,000 of our joint capital to purchase a premier table at a prestigious Technology Foundation gala. He called it a necessary corporate expense for networking visibility. Yet in that exact same week, he had aggressively blocked me from making a personal $65,000 donation to mass-purchase advanced intraoperative MRI monitors for dying infants in my ward. He had scoffed at the idea, pacing around our kitchen and telling me that discussing blood, brain tumors, and sick kids over champagne makes his investors deeply uncomfortable. He demanded I stick to discussing cloud formations and luxury vacation rentals when speaking to his peers. I earn a base salary of $85,000 keeping children alive. Yet, I was standing in a glass pavilion being treated like a silent decorative accessory who didn't understand basic finance. I remembered the exact moment the shift had happened. During my intense surgical residency, Tyler used to wait outside the operating theater in the snow with hot coffee, wrapping his heavy coat around my shoulders after a grueling 14-hour shift. That manufactured warmth had slowly evaporated, replaced by a cold, transactional dynamic where I was only as valuable as my ability to quietly elevate his status. Looking back, I understood exactly why I had stayed. It is the trap of natural competence. As a pediatric neurosurgeon, my entire existence is built on enduring immense pressure, severe sleep deprivation, and profound trauma to achieve a successful outcome. I am highly trained to absorb suffering and push forward. I had mistakenly treated my toxic marriage exactly like a complex failing neurosurgery. I erroneously believed that if I just applied enough willpower, tolerated enough structural pressure, and kept my head down, I could stabilize the patient. I thought my endurance was a virtue. I didn't realize it was the exact mechanism Tyler was using to drain me. But standing at the edge of that dance floor, listening to the echoing laughter of the venture capital elite, the conditioning finally snapped. My anger solidified into cold, absolute certainty. I reached calmly into my designer clutch and pulled out my device.
I opened a secure encrypted folder I had been meticulously maintaining for weeks. With unshakable surgical precision, I tapped the screen and hit send, transmitting 3 years of thoroughly documented financial discrepancies directly through the federal whistleblower encrypted portal. I forced a polite clinical smile to form at the corners of my mouth. It was not the submissive expression I had perfected for his firm's network. It was the expression of a master neurosurgeon preparing to cleanly excise a terminal mass. The sudden absolute authority of my composure caused the laughter closest to me to falter and completely die. The drive back to our sterile coastal residence was entirely silent. The Boston Harbor air bid at the glass windows perfectly matching the freezing temperature inside the car. Tyler did not offer a single word of apology. He did not attempt to explain his public cruelty or soften the blow. Instead, he seamlessly transitioned into the villain's escalation, doubling down on his arrogance to prove he had absolutely no remorse for what he had done. Inside the house, he ignored my presence completely. He paced the expensive hardwood floors while scrolling through tech stocks on his tablet, acting as if I were totally invisible. When I calmly asked him about his brutal behavior in front of his founding partners, Tyler scoffed. He deployed his classic gaslighting mechanism without missing a single beat. He told me I was being highly theatrical and emotionally unstable. He claimed his high society circle required light-hearted, edgy humor to break up the intense tension of high-stakes capital tracking, and that I was simply too rigid and socially inept to understand elite networking. Then he turned to me and delivered his final desperate threat. If my miserable face ruined his professional trajectory, he would unleash his corporate legal team to drain our joint accounts and lock me out of every asset we owned before I could even file for divorce.
He looked at me with total disdain, confident that his financial intimidation would keep me firmly in my place. He didn't realize that my emotional attachment had already been cleanly amputated. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice to defend myself. I just nodded, turned around, and walked into the kitchen. The behavioral transitions were immediate and permanent. I did not brew his morning coffee. I did not lay out his schedule for the next day. The subscription to my care had been definitively canceled, and he was completely unaware of his impending bankruptcy. Instead, I walked into my private home office and locked the heavy oak door. I shifted entirely from internal containment to systematic professional retaliation. I picked up my phone and placed a late-night call to my older sister, Abigail. Abigail is a cutthroat elite corporate attorney who specializes in tracing hidden offshore capital. I told her I needed a complete aggressive forensic audit of Tyler's venture incubator. I wanted every shell company, every hidden ledger, and every single wire transfer pulled into the glaring light. I wasn't initiating a petty family drama. I was preparing for multi-million-dollar structural warfare. My marriage was completely over, but the accounting had just begun. Within 72 hours, Abigail uncovered a devastating offshore matrix that elevated this conflict from standard domestic abuse to federal corporate crime. She invited me to her downtown office, her expression grim and strictly professional as I sat across from her. She pushed a sleek tablet across her mahogany desk. On the screen was a pristine, high-resolution scan of my own signature, flawlessly forged on a series of complex wealth transfer documents. This was the lethal discovery. The premier tech startup incubator that Tyler publicly bragged about building entirely from scratch with his own genius was a complete and utter lie. It had been secretly seeded by extracting $11,000 from a non-collateralized trust left specifically to me by my deceased biological father. It was a sacred trust I had intended to leave untouched for the future. Tyler had systematically forged my medical credentials and my personal signatures over 3 consecutive years. He used my stolen capital to siphon massive funds into Cayman Island and offshore shell companies, quietly laundering the money back into his venture firm to artificially buy his partnership track. The revelation violently recontextualized our entire 5-year marriage. Tyler's domestic snobbery and his constant obsessive need to diminish me in front of his colleagues wasn't just a byproduct of his fragile, insecure ego. It was a highly calculated double-blind curtain designed to hide his total financial dependency on my wealth. He actively erased my presence and minimized my professional standing to ensure his venture capitalist partners never looked too closely at his wife. He knew that if his elite circle ever discovered who I really was, they might also discover that his entire corporate empire was legally and financially dependent on my stolen inheritance. Staring at the forged signatures on the glowing screen, any lingering societal guilt I felt about destroying my husband completely vanished. This was the ultimate kill shot. It removed every possible path to redemption. He was not just an ungrateful, emotionally abusive partner. He was a parasite. He was a corporate criminal who had funded his overwhelming arrogance with the ghost of my father's legacy. I tapped the tablet screen, downloading the offshore logs to my own secure server. The evidence was irrefutable, shocking, and entirely credible. The blade was perfectly sharpened. All that was left was the execution of judgment. The execution of judgment took place 2 days later at the Boston Harbor Glass Boardroom. It was Tyler's high-stakes evaluation track presentation, the absolute pinnacle of his entire career. I timed my arrival flawlessly. I walked through the heavy double doors with unshakable calm. 2 federal agents, whom I had briefed with the final forensic data that morning, remained stationed just outside the glass entrance, waiting for my signal. Tyler was standing proudly at the projection podium, confidently presenting inflated growth metrics to the founding partners, Marcus and Jessica, and the deeply complicit tech fund director, Bradley. The exact moment Tyler saw me, his smug expression immediately drained away. His face turned an ash gray. He opened his mouth to arrogantly order me out of his meeting, but catching sight of the 2 federal agents watching him intently from just outside the glass entrance silenced him instantly. Without saying a single word, I walked directly to the boardroom theater console. I plugged my encrypted device into the main projection system. The massive screens behind Tyler blinked, replacing his colorful growth charts with high-definition scans of the offshore shell logs and forged signature documents. Before anyone could speak, I hit play on an audio file. The clear, tiny recording of Tyler and Bradley explicitly discussing siphoning client portfolios to cover their tracks echoed loudly off the glass walls. I followed it immediately by projecting massive screenshots of intimate Thursday night text messages Tyler had been sending to Madison, the firm's highly paid senior managing director and a key institutional partner. The room descended into absolute terrified chaos. Marcus leaped backward in horror, his face pale as he fully processed the impending federal exposure. Jessica let out a sharp, devastated gasp, her hand flying to her chest as she realized her private $95,000 diamond brooch had been purchased using their siphoned corporate capital.
The entire high society illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of them. I watched Tyler fall onto a designer leather seat, completely undone. His heavy, ragged breathing filled the silent gaps in the room. He was begging for silence, his hands shaking violently as he looked at me. I turned toward the glass doors and gave a slight nod. The two federal agents immediately stepped into the room, their flash badges catching the corporate light, and calmly informed Tyler that his offshore assets were frozen and he was officially under federal arrest. This is the phenomenon of the narcissistic mirror collapse. A corporate bully's identity is built entirely on external curation, a rented facade paid for with stolen capital and social performance. They have absolutely no internal character to rely on. The moment you shatter the mirror by exposing the unvarnished, documented numbers, they lose their reflecting audience. Severed from public validation, their entire personality structure violently implodes. He had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. The aftermath was absolute and clinically clean. The federal authorities immediately froze Tyler's $45,000 in offshore crypto wallets, along with his private vintage vehicle collection worth $6,000. The systemic collapse of his elite circle was swift and merciless. Even Tyler's highly status-conscious mother, Amanda, was left devastated. To salvage whatever remained of her own elite social standing, she publicly disowned him, refusing to pay his bail or look him in the eye as his fraudulent empire dissolved into the public record. Months later, Tyler was permanently stripped of his bespoke suits and dressed in a standard orange jumpsuit. He stood in a federal courtroom and was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. As the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, he turned to me and mouthed a pathetic apology. I simply turned my back. I felt no remorse. I felt no hesitation. I walked out of the courthouse, got into my car, and drove straight back to Mass General, scrubbing in to perform a flawless 7-hour pediatric neurosurgery. The harbor fog had finally lifted, revealing clear blue skies over the hospital pavilion. I had fully reclaimed my real, uncompromised legacy. I've come to realize that true personal power does not stem from staying small. To soothe a fragile ego, you do not have to perform emotional CPR on a rotting relationship just because you are highly capable of enduring the pain. For years, I treated my own brilliance like a liability to protect a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenient accessory. I learned the hard way that forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes the most profound act of healing is cleanly excising the toxic tissue so you can finally set yourself free. Do not dim your light for parasites who only know how to feed in the dark. If Emily's calculated pursuit of justice showed you that character will always outlast pretense, press that like button right now. Share this story with one brilliant professional who needs to stop staying small, and hit subscribe to join our unshakable community. Drop your thoughts below. Let's discuss her ultimate victory.